Okay, so continuing our video on photosynthesis and how living things capture free energy from the environment, we started off talking about the light reactions, the so-called light reactions that actually use light, as you can see here, and they combine that light with protons from water in a process called the electron transport chain. And basically what the electron transport chain does is it takes those protons from the water and forces them on one side of the membrane at a very high concentration, and one side of the membrane of these thylakoids right here. And then those protons are allowed to flow back across the membrane, and the energy that's released is used to produce lots of ATP. And those protons, which have now become high energy, are also picked up, or the electrons, which have become high energy, are picked up by this NADPH as well. So we've got high energy electrons and we've got ATP, both of which are examples of stored energy. And this energy originally came from the light that hits the chloroplast. Now, the waste product that's released here is some oxygen, because the protons and their electrons are stripped off of the water and the oxygen is left over. Now, this ATP and NADPH is not, it is a lot of energy, but that's not where the process ends. What the plant is going to try to do is to turn this into a longer term storage, something that it can keep for weeks and months and years, as opposed to ATP, which doesn't last very long in a cell at all. And so that's going to require what we call the Calvin cycle. And the Calvin cycle is also sometimes called the dark reactions because it's the opposite of the light reactions. It does not require light. But the better name for these reactions over here is light independent. So it doesn't require light to do this part of the reaction. And another thing to notice is all these things we're going to be talking about here happen in a part of the chloroplast called the stroma. This is a chloroplast, not a cell. This is the chloroplast. And chloroplasts have thylakoids right here, which is where the light reactions happen. And outside of the thylakoids is this extra space called the stroma. That's where the light-independent reactions happen. And as you can see, the overall process is that we're going to be taking carbon dioxide, CO2, and we're going to be turning it into sugar. And that sugar is another form of stored energy, and the great thing about sugar is it lasts a long time. It's a really stable form of energy, and it stores a lot of energy. You can sit a pound of sugar on your countertop for years, and it's going to stay there with all of its energy intact. Now, the Calvin cycle, this process whereby carbon dioxide is turned into sugars, specifically the sugar that is usually created is called glucose. It has a lot of really complicated steps. And I don't really expect you to memorize all these steps. These are not on the AP test. But essentially what's happening is you've got these carbon molecules, those three dots are carbon, and they're attached to phosphates, and they're just being recombined. There's just a bunch of reactions going on, and all the steps require an input of ATP. So this ATP was created in the light reaction before, like we said, and 6 ATP are going to be used here. And then 6 high-energy electrons are going to be donated by NADPH. Those electrons came from the light reactions as well. And that's going to produce something called G3P. And that G3P, you combine those together in order to form glucose. But it also creates some of those G3Ps actually get recycled, and a little bit more ATP is going to be added again to connect them together. And those can go around and basically replenish this cycle. So you've got these molecules that are just being recombined and changed and recycled. The only things that really matter are the things that are being added to this cycle to keep it going and the things that are being created by this cycle. So what's really more important is this overall reaction. You've got carbon dioxide going in, you have glucose coming out. And what's required to power this is ATP and NADPH that are formed in the light reactions. And of course, those ATPs are turned into ADP, and the NADPH is turned into NADP+. And these are actually just sent right back to the light reactions, right back to the thylakoid, and they'll be turned back into ATP and NADPH in order to continue a cycle and come back and bring energy to the Calvin cycle again. So everything is kind of reused. The only things that are not reused in photosynthesis are these things right here. We have carbon dioxide being added to the plant. We have water being added to the plant. And there's a bunch of reactions that happen. And then what comes out the other side is sugar and oxygen. And so we do want to keep track of where these things go. The water, like we said, is going to be split in the light reactions. And the protons and their electrons are going to be used in the electron transport chain. And the oxygen is going to simply be released. This is the oxygen from that water. And the carbon dioxide is going to be used in the light independent reactions. For the Calvin cycle. And basically what's going to happen is the carbon and oxygen here are going to be combined with hydrogens from water to make sugar. And this is a really great process because essentially what's happening is you're taking light and you're storing the energy from light in sugar. And plants and fungi and animals, all living things, are able to actually take that sugar, recombine it with oxygen, and run this whole process backwards the other way and get that energy back. And so you've got essentially this endless cycle of energy entering through light, being stored as sugar, and then being released again. And photosynthesis is one part of that process. The release of the energy happens in a process called cellular respiration.